right, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We honor to host this unique, timely event featuring the book Unveiled, Inside Iran's Women Life Freedom Revolt, with a special guest, Jonathan and Gazelle. My name is Dora, and I am pleased to be your host today, together with Inam and Jasmine. The event is proudly organized by Forum 1325 for Political Agreement. And a little bit about the forum. Forum 1325 is a coalition of women from diverse sectors of Israeli society, private individual and organizational representative, working together to promote dialogue, raise public awareness about possible political solution to the conflict. Those include the two-state solution, confederation, federation, one state, and or binational, and a range of hybrid solution. We are committed to advancing a sustainable political agreement based on the value of equality, freedom, democracy, human rights, personal and collective security, the right to self-determination, fair representation of diverse population group, negotiation and dialogue over violence. Those are the core principles of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which call for women inclusion in peace and security effort. I am proud to be one of the founders of Forum 1325, and today I also lead the Democracy and Federalism Hub, an initiative dedicated to promote education and action around democracy, decentralization, and federalist solution. We work across communities and government structure, offering new approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and exploring a broader regional cooperation in the Middle East. So thank you for joining, and I'm going to transfer the stage to Inam. Please, Inam, go ahead.
Hi, good evening to everybody. As said Dora, my name is Inam. I'm an Arab Palestinian citizen of Israel. I live in a village north of Israel, and I'm a nurse, but I'm also active, social active, and I'm almost 8 years in women wage peace, and the cabinet Nashim and Forum 13 to 25. Women wage peace, it's a big movement in Israel, includes Arab and Jewish. And we work in locally in Israel and out of Israel. We have also a movement, a sister movement in West Bank called Women of the Sun, and we work together to bring to make a better life here, and to be in connection each other for good life. And I want now to introduce our visitors here, Jonathan Harounoff. Jonathan Harounoff is a British-Iranian journalist, now serving as Israeli international spokesperson to the United Nations since September 2024. And the award-winning author of Unveiled, Inside Iran's Woman Life Freedom Revolt, set to publish on September 25 this year. In his new book, he draws on heart-wrenching interviews with the survivors of Iran's 2022 Women Life Freedom, inspiring sparked by Marsha Jina Amini, I hope I spell it right, this. Highlighting how courageous women lead perhaps the most existential challenge to Iran's Islamic Republic. Jonathan's insights have been featured in major outlets such as the New York Times, BBC, Fox News, Haaretz, and Jerusalem Post. And he frequently appears on TV discussions, Iran's, Israel, and anti-Semitism. Jonathan, I want to ask you a few questions. First question is, what drew you to focus on the woman life and the freedom movement, and how did the narrative evolve while you were researching and writing Unveiled?
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Enam. Just to clarify, Dora and team, should I first spend a few minutes presenting the book and then I can answer the questions?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Enam, and thank you to Dora, Bender, Yasmin, Gerin, Hadass, Sadeh, and the rest of the brilliant team at Forum 1325 for putting together this important call. And of course, thank you to my dear friend Gazelle for making the time to join us, and for all of you from all over the world for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Friends, 3 years ago, something extraordinary happened inside Iran. A 22-year-old Kurdish-Iranian woman named Mahsa Amini was traveling with her family to Tehran from her hometown of Saqqez in the northwest of the country. She was not thinking about politics. She was not thinking about staging an uprising. All she was doing, most likely, was thinking about her future, her life, her prospects, her university studies. But shortly after arriving in Tehran, she was stopped by the Islamic Republic's so-called morality police. Why? Her crime was wearing her hijab too loosely. Like thousands of other women before her, she was arrested, but unlike most, she never made it home. She was taken into police custody, where she was beaten to a pulp and where she fell into a coma. 3 days later, on September the 16th, 2022, she died. And her death was not just a tragedy, it was a spark. Within hours of Mahsa's death, Iranians took to the streets. Women burned their hijabs, students chanted in universities, and men stood shoulder to shoulder with their sisters, their mothers, their daughters. Virtually all 31 of Iran's provinces were engulfed in unprecedented scenes of protest. And the slogan that united them, "Women, Life, Freedom," became a rallying cry, not just in Iran, but around the world. We saw these slogans chanted in the White House, Downing Street, the United Nations, from London to Berlin to Sydney. And we saw female foreign dignitaries, celebrities, even members of parliament and Congress cut their hair in protest in a global echo of grief and solidarity. And this uprising, its origins, its successes, its shortcoming, and its legacy is the focus and subject of my upcoming book, Unveiled: Inside Iran's Women, Life, Freedom Revolt. And this book couldn't be more timely. Just last month, we saw a direct clash between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Israel in a way that would have once seemed unthinkable. And now we've seen talks of regime change in Iran, which was long considered a fantasy in policy circles, once again become a serious topic of conversation. But before we get there, I want to tell you a bit about what I learned in the process of writing this book, Unveiled. I spoke with women who had risked everything, some of whom had lost everything, activists who had fled for their lives, and opposition figures, some hopeful, some hardened, who offered competing visions for what a future Iran could look like. The first major takeaway that I drew is this: that the people of Iran are not the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are not their government, and they never have been. This is a population that for over 2,500 years has built civilizations, pioneered poetry, science, medicine, and art. This is a culture that once led the ancient world and today still reveres education, culture, and dignity. The Islamic Republic, by contrast, is just 46 years old. That's a blip. It's a regime that took over in 1979, took American embassy workers hostage for 444 days, and immediately and violently severed Iran from the world. It imposed an ideology of isolation, of repression, of vengeance, and it declared war on women's autonomy, on individual liberty, and on modernity itself. From the very beginning, from 1979 and onwards, we've seen that the vast majority of the Iranian people have resisted. They've risen up again and again. We saw it in 1999 with the student protests. We saw it in 2009 with the disputed presidential re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. We saw it in 2017, 18, 19 over woeful economic challenges. And we saw it in 2022 and 2023 with the Women Life Freedom protest movements, which was the most powerful uprising to date, where extraordinary individuals inside Iran and abroad, like Gazelle, united against the regime. And even after that, and before the conflict between Israel and Iran, we saw another massive uprising underway. We saw truckers from all over Iran stage massive protests against the regime. The second takeaway that I took from writing the book is this: that Iranian people want what people everywhere in the world want. They want freedom, they want dignity, and they want a better future for their children. They want the ability to dance in public, to dress how they choose, to fall, whether it involves wearing a hijab or not. They want the freedom to do that, to decide what they do. They want to fall in love freely, they want to learn, they want to create, they want to travel, and most of all, they want to reconnect with the world. Most, around 70 to 80%, are not anti-Western. Most are not anti-capitalist. And despite what the regime's propaganda insists, they are not anti-Israel. In fact, this leads me to the third and perhaps most unexpected takeaway from my research, that there is a genuine and perhaps unexpected affinity between the people of Iran and the people of Israel. For example, in the aftermath of the October 7th terror attacks, one of the first diaspora groups to attend rallies in support of the Israeli victims were Iranians from Los Angeles, Berlin, Paris. And back in 2022, when Iranian women were being beaten and killed inside Iran while demanding freedom, it was Israeli citizens who were among the first to show solidarity, whether that manifested by lighting candles, raising banners, marching in support. And you may ask why? Why did this happen? And the answer, I think, is because both of these peoples, Israelis and Iranians, have both suffered at the hands of the same regime, whether it's directly or indirectly through terror proxies. And because before 1979, Israel and Iran did actually share deep positive relations. Iran was, in fact, the second Muslim majority country in the world to recognize Israel back in 1950, and that was second only to Turkey. And this isn't just nostalgia. This isn't just romanticizing about a possible future. It's a vision of what could actually happen again. Imagine an Iran where women are free to lead and to wear what they want, where universities are no longer battlegrounds, but they're beacons of innovation. Imagine seeing once again direct El Al flights between Tel Aviv and Tehran. Imagine seeing all the cultural exchange, the scientific collaboration, the shared water projects, the trade, the tourism. All of this is unlikely now, of course, but it's not impossible. Absolutely not. These seeds have already been planted, and there is resistance inside Iran. And the diaspora has become more united in recent years, more focused, more connected, even though there is still fragmentation out there that we can discuss later on. And as this pressure builds economically, diplomatically, demographically, the regime does know that it cannot hold back the tides of history forever. So what's next? And I think that's the question that my book tries to answer. It's a difficult question, but I try. It doesn't pretend to predict the exact pathway to change, but it lays out the human architecture of what that change might look like. Grassroots networks, brave men and women, opposition figures trying to unify, diaspora groups finding new allies, and above all, hope. Real hope, not the kind manufactured in think tanks in Washington, D.C., but the kind that's born in the alleyways of Tehran, the protests on Fridays in Zahedan, the classrooms of Shiraz. I say this because I think we are at an inflection point, and the world can choose whether or not they continue dealing with Iran as a problem to be managed, or it can choose to see the people of Iran as partners in creating a future Middle East that's rooted in peace, pluralism, and prosperity. Unveiled is not just a book about what went wrong. It's a book about what could go right if we listen. And if we remember that sometimes it is the quietest uprisings and even revolutions, the ones led by women, by students, by the brave, by the unheard, that can change the world most profoundly. Thank you.
Jonathan, can you explain to us how what drew you to focus on this issue?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you for the question. The first thing is, before taking on this current role, I was covering Iran and the region as a journalist for about 7 years. And given my family background, both my grandparents on both sides of my family are from Iran, it's always been a personal and professional interest to me. And one thing that really struck to me about this protest movement in 2022, 2023 was how people from all walks of life, all over the world, did in this one moment in time rally together in protest to collectively send the message that they had had enough of the Iranian regime. Of course, it didn't lead to a ultimate success of the people of Iran in unseating the regime, because it's still there and because the Islamic Republic unleashed a brutal wave of arrests, imprisonments, executions. But it probably was the closest the Iranian regime came to falling in its 46-year history.
Can you, in your view, how can the international community, including the UN, best support the Iranian women's struggle for freedom without comprising local agency?
It's a sensitive question, and I think the answer is that, from what I found, at least in speaking to people on the ground and in the diaspora, is that the people of Iran are not asking and they're not looking for the international community to bring about regime change in their own country. They don't want that. And they have shown time and again that they will rise up themselves. What they do want from the international community, that I think Gazelle is in the best position to talk about how she's lived this, is they want real, tangible support in other ways. They want, namely, by Western governments imposing sanctions on the Islamic Republic, by severing economic ties with the regime, and applying other measures of pressure. And at the UN specifically, you have the snapbacks approaching, which refer to the automatic reimposition of UN Security Council sanctions on Iran. And the date for this snapback that's coming back is October the 18th, 2025, so we're not far away. And that's also the 10th anniversary of the Iran nuclear agreement that was signed, known as the JCPOA. That's the deadline for deciding whether or not to terminate or extend UN Security Council Resolution 2231. And what happens there is really going to dictate how emboldened or how weakened the Islamic Republic is, and what kind of relationship many governments in the West have with the regime.
Mm-hmm. And looking ahead, what do you see as the most possible path of meaningful change in Iran, inspired by these women-led protests?
What I've seen, at least personally, is that modern recent Iranian history is extremely unpredictable. So I want to refrain from speculating, but historically, what we've seen is that all it's taken is for there to be a tiny trigger, an isolated incident that can serve as a spark to lead to major uproar. So an isolated incident that sort of metastasizes into something nationwide, if not global. We saw that in 2009 with the disputed presidential re-election of Ahmadinejad, which was a heavily contested election where his opponent was seen as the front runner, and he ended up not winning. And we saw in 2009 the filmed killing of a younger female philosophy student, Neda Sultan, and her killing really did spark a massive uprising. And we saw the same thing again in 2022 when the 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was killed, and that led to a major uproar because she was an ordinary young girl. And I think that's what resonated so much with so many ordinary Iranians, that it could have been any one of them walking in the street, getting stopped, getting harassed, getting abused by the morality police. And I think that's one of the major things for really resonating with all of them.
Mm-hmm. And from your conversation with protest survivors, what stories of resilience left lasting imprint on you?
There are so many to choose from, Inam, and they were all painful and heartbreaking to hear from women and mothers who took part in the protests and were intentionally shot in the eyes and then had to get life-saving treatment abroad, to female athletes who were hounded by the regime and prevented from really fulfilling their potential, to incredible voices in the diaspora like Gazelle, who went to unbelievable lengths to raise awareness about her father's wrongful imprisonment and who fought unbelievably hard for his release. There were so many different voices, and all of them point to the really callous cruelty of the regime and how the regime has focused cared so little about its own people and focused so much on sort of sowing regional havoc. And it's these personal stories are what really, really struck me the most.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Donatan, for sharing us your book and your stories. I will pass to Dora to continue with our invites.
Yeah, thank you so much, Johnny. And all right, 1 second. Okay, Gazelle, here you are. All right, so thank you so much. We're really happy today to host Gazelle Sharmahd. She is a German-American freedom activist, born into a family of resistance as a daughter of a kidnap and murder dissident, Jamshid Sharmahd. She led global campaign at Halt and the execution wave in Iran, has spoken at the UN, US Congress, and European Parliament, and is known to combat disinformation and connecting movement for liberty. So this is very inspiring, and we would like you to share some of your experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dora. Can you guys hear me? Just checking the microphone.
Yes, yes.
Yes, very good. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, first of all, to Forum 1325 and the women's movement in here. Thank you, Dora. Thank you, Inam. Thank you, Jasmine, and everybody else for what you're doing. And I myself believe in the same values that you do, that women voices are needed to reshape all of our broken systems out there. And thank you to Jonathan, first of all, for everything that you've been doing in the last decades of your journalism. And I'm looking forward to reading your book, which is so, so important and so timely at this time. And one more time, congratulations to your new position that you have since 2024. I think this is historic. I just talked to you about this, that we have now an Iranian, like somebody of Iranian descent, being a spokesperson for the Israeli permanent mission at the UN. And that shows the unbroken ties of Iranians and Jews throughout history, throughout millennia that we have together, and the unbroken ties of many of our people in the Middle East that these Islamists try to take apart, but they're never successful, and we're showing that here. So congratulations to that. Let me begin by introducing myself to the people who might not be familiar with me. My name is Gazelle Sharmahd, and I'm the daughter of Jamshid Sharmahd, and I did not choose my activism in this way that it is right now, public and a threat to my life. I was always an activist, but this path chose me when the Islamic regime decided to target my father, first in 2020 with assassination attempts here in Los Angeles, and then first in 2009, sorry, with assassination attempts in Los Angeles, and then later in 2020, when agents of the regime came and kidnapped my father on a flight overlay, took him to Iran, kidnapped him through 2 state borders to Iran, held him hostage and tortured him for 4.5 years. And then ultimately last October, a few months ago, like half a year ago, they murdered my father, and beyond that, mutilated his body, cut him into pieces. And we're still right now in the battle of getting his corpse back to America, where we can have justice and accountability and rightful actions against the regime, and finally bury him and have some, ending, at least like emotional ending to this story. But we're still stuck on that. He's stuck in Germany right now. We don't have the means to bring him, but that is a completely different story here. So it's never ending. This is just for you to understand that this battle goes beyond families. It's a battle for national liberty. So my dad's story is not unique to my family. It is the story of every Iranian that has fought against this regime, but their stories are untold because their fathers are not like mine, German American. So they didn't have the opportunity to bring this up to the UN, to the German parliament, to the European parliament, to the American Congress. And even though we were not able to save him, at least we were able to make some changes there. So my father, just so you know, like why he was targeted, was born in Iran, but he was just like us, raised in Germany. And then we moved 2 decades ago to America. He was lucky enough to be schooled by scholars of ancient Iran, professors who studied history, who, even though the Islamic regime tried to erase our history, rewrite history in our colleges and our universities inside of Iran and outside, as most of you are aware, they have infiltrated our Ivy schools in America and Europe and so on, are teaching of wrong history. And that is a big problem of why the West is unaware of what to do and who's good and who's bad, and brainwashed, so to say, by our enemies. So my father was was able to be schooled by historians inside of Iran, and later on when he was in America, following professors who were telling us, where do Iranians come from? What are our values? And the most important part is what is an awakening to many who are not aware of that because they lived outside of the country, that the Islamic regime is not a government of Iran. It is a foreign occupation. It came to Iran in 1979 to occupy Iran, to take it by force, to seize power, to erase Iran. So they are mortal enemies of Iranians. That's why the Iranian people from day one have been revolting against them. They came in, they replaced our flag, they replaced our institution, they tried to erase our language, they tried to take over our culture, our identity, everything that is Iranian. And why? Because they want to take the resources of the land, which Iran was very rich in oil and gas and gold and all of that kind of stuff, to finance their terror. And we see that very clear in the last 2 years, how they finance their terror networks outside of the country, which is Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq, in Syria, and all over the world. So that is their network that they have financed with the money of the Iranian people while systematically murdering Iranians. So that is why the Iranians inside of the country don't call them an Iranian government, don't call them an Iranian regime, and don't actually call for regime change. They call for liberation of their country that is under occupation by their enemies. So that is number one. Number two, coming back to the book that Jonathan is writing about the Women, Life, Freedom Revolution, it is and I think Jonathan did a very, very good part of explaining that it is not necessarily about feminism, gender oppression. This is a liberation movement of a nation. And the women, which are half of the population, were the first to be enslaved by the occupiers who came in and forced a hijab on the Iranian women. Why? If you oppress half of the population that you're trying to oppress, half the game is already won. So the women were actually the first one in 1979 who stood up and made a big rally and big movements to liberate themselves. And they were the first to be shot in the eyes, to be raped, to be put into prison, and to be executed there. So Iranians by nature, by culture, we have a very strong liberation movement led by women. We had women generals, women warriors, women are always in the forefront, but it's not about gender equality. If women in Iran were able to get the same rights as men, they would have the rights of my father, which was the right to be kidnapped, the right to be silenced, the right to be tortured and the right to be executed and mutilated and labeled as an enemy and destroyed. That is the right of everybody in Iran. So it is sometimes confused in the West with gender movements or something like that. It is part of it, of course, and women have a very strong voice and are at the forefront, but it is a national liberation movement. That's what we have to understand. The next point is about that I want to make is about my experience and the reality that Western governments did not only fail us, they chose to save our oppressors. And that was a hard truth for me to learn on my own story. That is something that my father tried to teach me for decades, and I would not believe it until I saw it with my own eyes. You can see it very clearly in 2023 when Jonathan and I first started talking, actually. We were, at that time, it was before October 7th, we were in DC. My father was kidnapped for 3 years, and the US government refused to talk to our family. Like, nobody can imagine that. Imagine being a citizen of this country and the government refuses to even speak to you because your truth and what you represent is against that regime that they have business ties with, that they have negotiations with, that they want to continue appeasing. So our story was a major inconvenience for our administration. So they blocked us for 3 years until we did a sit-in strike in front of the government. And they had to finally bring us in July, and they told us, Giselle, we're very sorry we're not speaking to you for 3 years. We're here to tell you we're making a deal with the kidnappers of your father. They will receive $6 billion and some hostages will come back, and your father is not one of them. And that is what this is all about. It is not personal, it is all business. And when you are the carrier of the truth and an enemy of the Islamic regime, you will not be saved. And that's what they told us in this hour that we spoke with them. And when I asked them, first of all, you're setting a precedent by giving terrorists and kidnappers $1.2 billion per head per hostage. What are you going to do about all of the future hostages? They said, what future hostages? Well, 2 weeks later, and our last talk with them was in September, we had October 7th, and we had 250 hostages by the proxy of the Islamic regime. So while I could not predict that it would be 250, it was very clear that terrorists look at that and say, well, this is great business right there. Let's apply that. And that is exactly what happened on October 7th. And we still have 50 of those hostages dead and alive in a hell in Gaza. With them, at the same time, we have hostages inside of Iran that are being held hostage, not labeled as hostages because they're labeled citizens of Iran and nobody cares about them. But there is this huge execution wave going on inside of Iran. And that is like almost my last point that I'm going to make. And you can always stop me because I go on and I talk a lot, but please stop me if I go over my time. And we initiated global initiatives. And when I say we, it's nothing that I did on my own. I cannot do anything on my own. We had the support of people like Jonathan, of people like you here, our allies from Israel, from all over the Middle East. Actually, one of my closest allies and partner is here right now, Dr. Walid Faris, who brought in the Middle Eastern, Society of Lebanon, of the Middle East, of Syria, of all of these nations that are also doing their own revolutions, their own fight against the oppressions there. So big coalitions came together, and with it, one of our biggest movements was Cut the Rope, where we had, I think, 125 outspoken people around the globe speaking up against the execution wave inside of Iran, so people understand the Islamic regime puts death sentences on the population of Iran, and these ones are not judges. These people are not criminals. They have not done anything wrong. This is equivalent to the Nazi Reich's gas chambers when they exterminated masses of people, and not just Jews, but masses of citizens and other people inside of the country. This was a genocide to take out people. This is happening inside of Iran through the execution rope. These are not real judges. These are not real laws. They have done nothing wrong. They're being exterminated right now. 3 executions per day are happening, and nobody is looking at that. And that is a tragedy, and we have to save those people. The
Yeah.
last point that the last point,
Okay, yeah, just say it and I'll continue. Go ahead.
of course, the last point that I want to make is about initiatives for peace. What most people know is that Israelis, Arabs, Iranians want peace. The people that don't want peace are the Islamists that have occupied many places, not just Iran. And we cannot force peace, ink peace on a paper with people who want to erase us, erase our history, erase our identity, erase our culture, our nations, and take away our breath. So that is something that we have to understand. So in order to have peace, and I loved one of you, I think it was Inam who said one of the initiatives is women waging peace. I love that because it is waging peace. It's not just asking and inking it in there. It is a movement of warriors fighting first the oppression. We cannot have tyranny in these areas and then expect that there will be peace. So freedom is a prerequisite to peace. And that is what many people try to surpass and go right into peace agreements with terrorists. We see that in Syria right now with HTS. We see that with the Islamic regime for so many years. We see that with Hamas. That does not work. We saw that with Hezbollah in Lebanon. That does not work. We have to fight and liberate these people from this oppression first. And then peace is a byproduct of this. What you can do, and I want to call it into action right now, anybody that is listening, is first of all, give us a stage like you're doing here right now. Mass media in the West has blocked us. Obviously, they don't want this kind of truth to be told to the masses, to the American people, to the European people. So we are majorly blocked. So you can follow us on social media. You can help us in getting justice for my father. And my father is, I want to make that very clear, it is not a personal story. My father bringing his name in front of the UN, in front of the German government, because he's also a German citizen, in front of the Congress over here, forced these institutions to deal with something that they don't want to deal with, which is that they are complicit while they're tolerating, while they're doing deals with our killers. They have taken an active role in financing transnational terrorism, kidnapping, hostage taking, all of those things is on them too. And that is something that they tried to avoid for so long. They have to face this because of the nationality of my father. So if you want to help us, we also have a GoFundMe to get my father's body back to America, be able to do the autopsies that we need, be able to bring this to courts and have arrest warrants against those criminals. So they cannot freely go to Rome and Geneva and New York and bring their propaganda with them. They will have arrest warrants and they will be in international courts where they will be tried for crimes against humanity and war crimes that they're committing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted you to answer some of the questions we wanted to ask you, but maybe you can highlight a little bit more because you're very active. So we want to see, can you share what activism was the most impact, the one that you really said, oh, this is the way to go, and because we would love to have an example and be inspired as well.
Yes, absolutely. My activism began from birth, I think, when I was like the student of my father, listening to what he was saying. But my activism in the public, which is more risky for us because, again, they tried to assassinate us here in Los Angeles, began when they kidnapped my father. And I think just me being in the face of these, of the media, in the face of NGOs who were not on our side, on the face of these governments who speak about human rights but then are funding the terrorists, showed pretty much to the diaspora and to our allies like a litmus paper test. They were very clear when a media was not willing to interview me but was willing to interview others, that this was a media infiltrated by our enemies, and that's why they're not doing that. Same with our governments and same with everything else. Same right now with our governments that is still not willing to speak to us. That is a litmus test that they have still such close business ties with our enemies that they cannot afford, that they're told by these networks, do not speak with this daughter, do not speak with that family. So this is the first point that we brought out when I came into this as a daughter of my father, trying to get this, but also the power of coalitions, as we said, like the coalitions that you have right now, the coalitions that we have formed. Every time it is just like on one nation, when we make it only one problem, it's only about the Iranian people, it's only our problem, nobody else can identify, and it becomes an isolated case of like human rights. It is not. This is a systematic thing, and we are not safe. We can see the intifadas on our college campuses. We can see that in America and Washington, Israeli diplomats are assassinated and nothing happened. We can see Germans like my father being kidnapped and assassinated. So we have seen that when we're coming together, we can move mountains. These governments who are infiltrated and influenced by billions, hundreds and billions of dollars of these Islamist regimes are a huge enemy. But we, as normal people, are able to do something. Let me give you an example. When one of our dissidents from Sweden, Swedish citizen, was kidnapped at the same time as my father, taken to Iran, same thing happened to him, tortured and executed. Nothing happened. Sweden didn't do anything. It's because he was isolated. Nobody supported this case. What we did when we brought everybody in on my father's case, Germany was forced to kick out diplomats. Germany was forced to close down all of the Islamic regime consulates. They're still closed today because of what they did. Germany was forced to go to the UN and start a fact-finding mission about the atrocities in Iran. So we have it in our power as normal human beings to go up against billions of dollars when we're working together, when we're building these networks. Then we can bring in these resolutions. So my advice to everybody is don't be polite. Bring everybody in, make it their case, make them not be bystanders and observers, explain to them why it is important to them and bring them together so we have a voice together.
Yeah, I want to ask you something personally, because we're women and you're a woman, and Jonathan is a male, and you wrote the book about women testimonies and stories. I thought it was very inspiring. But I want to ask you, do you have any stories that really impact you? I know that your father have a very, very strong story, but do you have any women in your life that really impact also your activism? Maybe they are there in Iran still, or maybe they are in the diaspora that you can share?
Hundreds of stories, which are so hard to share because every story shakes your heart. Every life shakes your heart. These are amazing women. I think the biggest influence on me is my daughter. When I was 5 months pregnant, my dad was kidnapped. So I was in the middle of pregnancy. So her birth and her seeing her, that is pretty much what influenced me why I'm doing this. Why would I put my life at risk and her life at risk? Because I want a future where she doesn't have to go through a world where it is okay for her grandfather to be kidnapped and murdered and mutilated and nobody does something against it. So that was my personal influence and my personal burning. But as you have seen, and probably it's also what Jonathan has shared in his book, is the systematic pressure on women in Iran from a young age. We saw during the Women Life Freedom movement how this regime took poisonous gas into schoolgirls' schools. So children as young as 12 years old were brought into emergency room from gas poisoning. This is just unimaginable for us to understand outside of the country that a regime would do that. But it is these young women that are such a threat to this theocracy, to these occupants, that they cannot even fathom a little schoolgirl being allowed by freedom fighters to be influenced to become a voice. So every single life inside of Iran, every single woman that we've seen in Israel, in the Middle East, speaking up, these are all burning in my heart and being a fire that is lit everywhere, including the men that raise them or that are married to them or that support them. You know, like you don't have to be a woman to be a feminist or support women. That is, my father raised me to be a feminist. My father came from this culture that said women are stepping up and taking this. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for everything you're sharing. And we want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to transfer the stage to Jasmine. Jasmine leading today, Forum 1325. And she's going to speak a little bit about herself, the forum, and transition to questions. So thank you. Jasmine, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Dora. First of all, thank you so much, Giselle and Jonathan, for sharing your experiences and such painful stories. I have one question of my own, and then I'm happy to collect. So I'll say I'm Yasmin Ghera. I'm director of Forum 1325. I've been in this field of gender and negotiation and conflict resolution for a while now, about 14 years, and very happy to be able to, at least in the context of our conflict, amplify the voices of women, because I think that we play a big role in changing the reality that we see on the ground right now in our region. I agree with you absolutely, Giselle. It doesn't mean that women only. We have our male allies and we can't do it without them, and they can't do it without us. And I loved what you said about once you enslave 50% of the population, it's that much easier to oppress the rest. So my quick question would be, Jonathan, you mentioned Iranians not wanting foreign intervention in the conflict. I guess foreign government intervention, which I fully understand, and I think it's also part of what's happening in our conflict. And at the same time, Giselle, you're mentioning something that I believe in very much, which is this solidarity of the people, right? The understanding of the value of human life and what we can do for others, even if we're not in the same situation or we're not nationals of the same country. So if either of you could comment a little bit what that looks like. So I'm very happy to have been able to amplify your voices today on our Zoom. What else does that look like in day to day? And I think maybe we'll take a couple of questions first, so that you can answer them consecutively. Anyone who wants to ask a question, I guess you can write in the chat or just raise hands through the Zoom.
Sorry, should we answer your question first or wait for other questions to come in?
I guess let's go ahead with this question and we'll give some people time to think as well.
Okay. I'll say something briefly and then Giselle, welcome to add. What I was talking about with foreign intervention is that there is quite a lot of trauma from what I've seen inside inside Iranian society, and also that's used as sort of propaganda by the regime in Iran, of actively not wanting outside governments to be overly involved, just given Iran's history pre-1979 and how governments were involved, looking back even to the 50s with controversial operations and missions. That's why the people of Iran are not asking and not demanding, boots on the ground foreign intervention. The only kind of foreign intervention they're seeking is sort of the opposite of foreign intervention. They don't want foreign governments to be collaborating with the regime in Tehran. They want them to actively disassociate themselves, untangle all of those trade relationships and ties, so that the regime is isolated and isn't able to continue to wage war on its people. And that can manifest itself through sanctions, through the involvement of UN resolutions, cutting economic ties, and other kinds of tools of economic pressure at their disposal.
Thank you, Jonathan. Giselle, would you want to comment on that before we move on to the next questions? We can't hear you. You don't seem on mute. Still can't hear you.
Okay, I think she's going to restart her computer. It helped last time. Yeah. I see Phil.
Had a few questions as well come in on the chat.
Yeah.
So there have here we go. She's rejoining. Let's just take a moment so that we can read the questions for Giselle as well.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So I'll just say in the chat we have some questions. Giselle, if you can send the link of the website where people can donate, that would be great. People are asking how they can connect with you. And then also, what would be a viable replacement to the current regime, and how would a new government remain stable given the capabilities of the Islamic Republic? There's also a couple of people raising hands. Do you want to respond to those questions first?
Yes,
And then
yes. I'm gonna
couple
put
more?
Sure. I'm gonna put my social media accounts in the chat in a second. It's on Instagram, it's free Jamshid Sharmahd. On X, it's Gazelle Sharmahd. I'm also on YouTube under Gazelle Sharmahd, and another podcast, War and Freedom podcast, where you can find me. And I'm going to put the GoFundMe link there as well for people who want to support us in this. So I want to second what Jonathan said. This is exactly right. Like, the people of Iran are saying, we don't want foreign interventions because the West is already intervening. For 46 years, they have supported, actively financed, negotiated, legitimized the oppressors. So yeah, we would like to not have them do that. But it's also, if we did that, if we stopped financing it, to stop legitimizing it, we didn't need boots on the ground. That does not mean, by the way, that in a liberation movement, when an army is coming and helping, like we saw in those 12 days that Israelis were pretty much bombarding the Islamic regime, that people say, no, stay out of this. Like, just like the French were occupied by the Nazis, they did not say, no, stay out of the Normandy, no D-Day, we're fine over, we have it. So that's sometimes a misconception as people have. No, it's when somebody is fighting the same fight, we are allies, and that is the same fight that we were fighting. It was very important to Iranians to see for the very first time, actually, somebody from the outside fight the army that is killing them. So not the IRGC, not the Quds force that is outside and terrorizing people outside of Iran. There is a force, an army specifically to kill people inside of Iran. It's called the Basij. So the Basij is the most hated, most savage, comparable to the Hamas people who stormed Israel on October 7th, that would do the most unimaginable atrocities that I'm not going to even mention here, but I mention on my channel sometimes. Those people were attacked on the day that the Ayatollahs ran to Qatar and asked them to tell the US to broker a ceasefire, because that army was attacked on that day. Basij was attacked on that day by Israeli forces. So I'm saying this so people can understand how can support from the outside be happening, not just from the people, but Western governments. What the Israelis did was set a precedent. They talked to the people of Iran directly several times, telling them, we are not at war with you. We are your allies. We have an ancient bonding together. We want to see Iran free right now and liberated right now. We have the same enemy, which is the Islamic regime. That's who we're going to target. This message alone, imagine this message from leaders in Europe, in Canada, in America to the Iranian people would break this cycle of terrorism and appeasement with these forces. And that is not boots on the ground. That is not an intervention. That is just acknowledging the people of Iran have a right to reclaim their country, just like we did during the Nazi regime. Nazis, you're done. We're not doing business with Hitler anymore. It doesn't matter if he produces nice cars. We're done with you. We see that this is a genocidal regime and we're against it, and we're on the liberation movement. That is what needs to be happening first. Second, we have many international laws. Right now, the Islamic regime is under ceasefire. Under ceasefire, we have conventions that happen to be legal. That means political prisoners, mass executions, imprisonments, false imprisonments, all of that are war crimes. And that means all of these world leaders need to address, the only time they need to address the Ayatollahs is not to talk to them about negotiations about a nuclear deal or anything like that, but to address them and tell them, if anything is happening to the political prisoners in Iran, this is a war crime, you will be held accountable, arrest warrants are out, and so on. So We have legal pathways that we can take. I think you asked, what is an alternative that we have? Well, that is sometimes the question that many ask. What will happen to Iran when the regime is not there anymore? It will be free. It will be back to being an Iranian government, whatever that is. Be it a kingdom like it's always been, being in a republic, a democracy, it doesn't matter. It is not under terrorist rule, and that is the difference that we had. Before that, we had great relationships, we had stability. So people need to stop asking. It's like somebody stepping on your throat and then asking, what will happen if we remove that boot? Well, then I can breathe. So it is less about the form of government and the form of replacement, which is very, very clear. We have, fortunately, the Crown Prince of Iran is the political spokesperson for the previous government, and he is leading a transition. That doesn't mean you have to be a monarchist. That doesn't mean it has to be a kingdom. That just means we have an official from the previous government before Iran was occupied that is leading a transition together with the rest of the opposition. So what we can do is bring this opposition together, have them acknowledged like we did with de Gaulle in France, right? Before France was freed. We acknowledged the opposition outside and we helped them in this transition. These are just the bare minimums that can happen from leadership. I forgot what the other question was, but yeah.
If I could I just add something, Jasmine?
Yes, of course.
I think it's also important to note, on top of everything that Gazelle was saying, that we cannot underestimate the resilience and strength and robustness of the Islamic Republic. It itself was born out of a revolution 46 years ago, and it has, as we've discussed, faced a lot of internal revolt and external pressure, and it has survived. And there's a reason for that. It survived because it's had no issue imprisoning its own people, hurting them, arresting them, killing them. And we saw with Operation Rising Lion and the recent conflict that there were immediate talks of the regime falling and there being regime change. First of all, that was never Israel's objective. But second of all, separate to that, I think it was, personally speak, I think it was a bit too premature to start thinking that the regime would immediately fall. This is a very, very powerful regime that has serious nuclear capabilities, serious arsenals of ballistic missiles, and a serious military. And I think it's also not in an anti-regime contingent's favor to underestimate the strength and power of the regime, which is why it's necessary for there to be such a robust opposition that Gazelle was referring to. And that's why it's so important for there to be unity among the opposition abroad and also within Iran.
Thank you very much for that. We have two questions. So Phil and then Noah.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Saunders, Chairman of Challenge, and I'm very happy to be here. And my question is, how weak do we believe the Iranian regime now is? Roughly what percentage of Iranians living in Iran support that regime? Alternatively, roughly what percentage support the Crown Prince? And are there any scenarios of a chaotic collapse of the regime that we should be seriously worried about?
Oh,
Thanks,
shall
Phil. I think maybe we'll take Noah's question and then you can answer both. Noah, you're still with us?
Yes. Thank you. First of all, thank you for sharing all these hard, extremely difficult facts that you told us. I'm grateful to you. I wanted to comment and ask on two things. One issue is the attack, the Israeli attack on the Iranian regime last month was done by actually a genocidal government. And part of the reason or part of the implications of this attack was the distraction for the horrific things that are done in Gaza, and the fact that Israel is not releasing its hostages, and it's not doing enough to release its hostages from the Hamas. So it may have done. I'm not sure how good it was for Iran, this attack, and maybe you can explain to us. And the second question was, I participated in the convention in Paris last month, and it was actually my revelation that the civil society can have a lot of power to make changes. And my question is there a civil society in Iran which can possibly make an opposition to the regime, or is it too dangerous for anyone to stand up to it? Thank you.
Yeah, those are all the questions right now, so feel free to jump in.
Sure. Thanks for your questions, Phil and Noah. So Phil, there's no like a simple, easy democratic polling in Iran as you can imagine, but I think the broad consensus is that it would be untrue to say that every single civilian supports is against the regime. I think the fair consensus is that there's around 20% of the citizenry that does support the regime for many reasons. Namely, perhaps they have, family members who are in the regime, dependent on the regime for existing, for their livelihood. But the figure is around at 20%. In terms of support for the Crown Prince, you can see, you just have to see alone on social media, on his meetings with different government leaders across the world, that there is significant, considerable, overwhelming support, both outside of Iran and inside of Iran. Whether or not he is the right person to transition the regime to be the sort of leader post regime is another question. He's fashioned himself at the very least as a sort of transitional leader, someone who has a tremendous following, who can guide the people of Iran to a sort of next democratic process where they can decide what kind of government they want. And there are people who are overwhelmingly supportive of him, and there are also people in the diaspora who think that he may not be the best person. But what cannot be disputed is that he is someone with a huge platform, history, ties to the country, and that's why he is very popular among many people. Just to touch on Noah's question as well, I respect your question, but I disagree. I don't think that the operation that Israel launched and that the United States launched subsequently was a distraction. I think it was the culmination of years of very sophisticated intelligence gathering, and I think it would be a sort of dishonor to the struggle of the people of Iran to say that that's why Israel attacked. I think the reason why Israel launched these preemptive strikes was in order to thwart a very imminent and existential threat that the country was facing. And it's not a distraction for what's going on between Israel and Hamas. That conflict continues to rage, and I don't think the world was distracted for more than 12 days. Even if the world's media looked elsewhere during those 12 days, we haven't forgotten what's going on. We haven't forgotten that there are still 50 hostages inside Gaza, who dead and alive, who must be free in order to bring about an end to this conflict that Hamas started. So I respectfully disagree with that assertion.
Yeah. Can I add to that?
I'd just like to comment on
Go
that.
ahead,
I think the
Gazelle.
distraction was meant for the people of Israel, which it did. It was a good distraction.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So thank you to both of you again for the question. I second everything that Jonathan also already has eloquently said. One thing to make it very clear, this regime is not Iranian. It is very a punch in the gut when people call our enemies Iranian. They're not ethnic Iranians. They're not ideological Iranians. They are Islamists. They renamed Iran when they came. They renamed the country of Iran the Islamic Republic. So they're anti-Iranian. So please, future references, don't call them Iranian regime when they are our enemies and anti-Iranian and killing Iranians. Actually, just so we have that one. It's a punch every time we hear that. But on the percentage, it's very hard for a country that is occupied by terrorists to have a raise of hands who's against the regime. But we did that actually, because people get assassinated when they even dare to speak out against them. But we did that in a way in 2024 when the regime had again their presidential elections, which are just selections. There's no elections inside of Iran. So the diaspora and the people of Iran said, to show that you're against the Islamic regime, boycott the elections. So by showing how many people from the voters boycotted the elections and didn't go to the elections, we have now the figures that show exactly as Jonathan said, about 88 to 90% of people boycotted the elections. That means close to 90% of the population says clearly in that selection, we are not with you. So the 10% again is of course the own people of the Islamic regime that they brought in, and those are foreign occupiers and people who are brainwashed and brought to it. But it is very clear now, finally, we have numbers to back that. How weak is the regime was the second question that Phil asked. Well, how weak do you have to be when you have an entire army killing people in order to be in power? Just in these 12 days, Amnesty International and other human rights organizations showed that there were over 700 arrests just in that 1 week. 700 arrests. That means the regime is terrified to be taken down. You don't arrest 700 people in 1 week because you're so strong. You do that because you're terrified. You know they're coming for you. They use every opportunity. It was not the opportunity right now for people to flood the streets because they have to see from the Western world what Israel did. You're not on the side of the regime. In 2009, in 2017, in 2022 and 23, people came to the streets just to be betrayed by Western governments who then sided with the regime and let them kill Iranian people. So that's the hesitation. About the popularity of the Crown Prince, I believe it is none of our concern how popular. He can be the most unpopular person or the most popular person. This is not a popularity contest. This is not an election. We don't have political campaigns right now to do an election because we don't have a country. What this is right now is a liberation movement. So it doesn't matter if you, for example, let's say Great Britain was taken over by terrorists. It doesn't matter if Charles or whoever is there, William or Charles or whoever is the most popular prince or king or not. He is the person that is leading the country right now. And when you want to liberate that country, you can refer back to that person that can lead it because they have been in a political position. That's why the Iranians are saying, well, he is perfect for a transition movement. And again, he's not leading a transition and deciding for the people of Iran what to do. It is very clear that the people of Iran will be liberated to go to the ballot box in a free country and elect what they want, what kind of governance they want. To Noah's question, I think Jonathan answered that already. I hope you did not say genocidal government to the Israelis because that's just factually wrong, and I think we can agree on that. But you said something that I want to respond to because you said Israel has not done enough for the hostages. I can tell you from my story which governments have not done enough for hostages. Germany did not do anything for my father. America did not do anything for my father. I would give the world for a government that would go against the Islamic regime, even in a war, which is horrible. Nobody of us wants war, to free my father. So that's what Israel has been doing in the last 2 years, even taking their own people and putting them in danger to get hostages back. What else do they need to do? You know who hasn't done enough? The 44 nations whose citizens have been massacred on October 7 and are still held hostage. The Bibas family are Germans. Eden Alexander is American. He was executed. These governments haven't done enough. If on October 7th, all of these 44 governments came together and demanded the release of the hostage and put pressure together, we would not be in a war right now. We would not see what we're seeing right now. So I think we have to stop blaming the only country that has done something for the hostages and look at these 44 nations who have been very silent. And I think I don't remember what else was asked.
I'm just mindful of the time. I want to make sure that we also let everyone go on time. Of course, we're staying here in case anyone has questions about the forum or wants to have follow-up questions, but we will try to end at very least by 1:15, but maybe 5 more minutes, just so there's one last question if someone wants to ask. Raquel, I see your hand raised,
Yes,
and then we'll do a closing.
well, first I just wanted to say thank you, Jonathan and Gazelle, for sharing your stories. It was very inspiring for me to hear from both of you and to get a better understanding. So my question, I wanted to ask, what's the situation now kind of like on the ground in Iran, and are people still demonstrating? Are they still protesting? And are they able to see like the solidarity movements abroad? Yeah, I just wanted to ask that.
Feel free to respond, and then we'll take it to a close.
Thank you so much, Raquel, for tuning in and for your question. I think it's inevitable that we're going to see another round of protests and uprisings. I think it was unfair of observers worldwide to assume that as soon as the war between Israel and Iran started, that the people of Iran should suddenly immediately rise in protest as opposed to seek safety. Why? Especially since their own regime doesn't care about their safety, they had to fend for themselves. But as we've seen time and time again, the people of Iran will rise up against the regime. All it takes is a trigger. And we've seen, even today, we've seen reports in numerous various outlets like Iran International notes that there are sporadic uprisings and protests taking place. Those things happen all the time. And because the people of Iran are desperate, they're living in poor socioeconomic conditions, and they need, they want a better life. So those kinds of protests are continuing to happen. But I think since the dust has begun to settle with last month's protest, last month's conflicts, we're going to see most likely more and more street protests and people rising up. These things take a matter of time, and it's up to the people of Iran to decide when they stage their own protests.
Yes, I want to add to that. I think the people of Iran showed us in 2022 till 2023 that they're ready to go to the streets, face the barrel of a gun of an IRGC commander, be shot in the eyes. I don't know if you guys saw the women whose eyes have been shot out, and hold down the streets for 12 months without any support. So they have done their part, showing like, we're ready to risk limb, life, eyesight, anything to get rid of them. They have done their part, we haven't. Outside of the country, we haven't created, first of all, the government in exile that would then help with this transition. But most importantly, we have conflicting messages from all of the Western governments. Anytime I'm speaking to the freedom fighters inside of Iran and I ask them, I don't even have to ask them, that's the two things that they say. When are you getting your coalition together? And second, when will the Western governments stop shaking the hands of our oppressors? And you see these conflicting messages from every government. On the one side, they're saying, yes, the people of Iran are a great nation. On the other side, they say, now we're going to sit down with their killers and their rapists and their mutilators and speak in Rome or in Oman or somewhere else about a nice negotiation. Which one is it? They have to decide. Are you on the side of the liberation of freedom-seeking people? Then stop talking to the oppressors. Hold them accountable. So this is as long as there are these conflicting messages, why would you come out? Why would you risk your life? We have right now so many people, the Ekbatan boys, 8 boys on death row. Their families are there just like night and day thinking they can be executed any moment. Nobody in the media is speaking about them. Why would you come out, have your life taken away, be on death row, have a noose around your neck, and nobody reports about you? So what we need to do is understand this is the liberation army inside. And if we want them to liberate, we have to support them when they're in pain, when they're behind bars, when they're being dragged up these cranes and hanged there. So what we need to do is have all the spotlights on there. Remember that these regimes benefit every time we forget about the people. We don't mention them. We don't speak of their names. So whatever you can do to highlight the people in Iran that are on death row is going to help them to have the courage. They don't need the courage, but to have the mobility to come back to the streets and know we have backing. If something happens to us, we're not being murdered in silence.
Thank you so much to both of you. I wanna summarize first by saying it's an honor to be able to give a platform to what you're saying today, and we hope we're able to continue collaborating. Thank you so much for your time. We will make sure to send via email the links that Giselle mentioned, the link also to Jonathan's book, Unveiled. And if there are any questions that have not been answered yet, please feel free to send them by email, and we will pass them on to the speakers so that they can respond. Thanks everyone for participating. We'll stay back from the forum in case anyone has any further questions. I just want to let our speakers go on time.
Yeah.
Wishing everyone else
Thank you
a
so
good
much.
evening.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Jonathan and Giselle.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
everybody.